Welcome to the Living Ageless and Bold podcast. Each episode, I bring you amazing women who inspire, educate, and share their experiences and journeys along the way. So grab a glass of wine or a cup of coffee, find a cozy spot, and let's relax and have some fun hearing what can be accomplished after 55. Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's episode. I'm so excited. I'm always so excited. I just get the most amazing guests. Sky Bergman is an artist, a photographer. She's in major museums. Her artwork or her photographs have been on magazine covers. She's just incredibly successful. She's a Professor of Emeritus. I can never say that word. I will have her say that. I cannot ever say it right at Cal Poly. But so she's in this world of art and photography and storytelling. And she is the director of Lives Well Lived, where she interviewed 40 people age 75 and older. Cumulatively, they're 3,000 years old. And the book and the special are just incredible. It's on PBS right now. And we're just going to dive into what got her to do this and tell some great stories about the people that were featured. So welcome.
You bet. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here. Yeah. And it's Professor Emeritus. I had to learn how to say it.
I cannot say that word. So I want to talk about, the project, but I want to talk about what got you there. Obviously, you have this background in art and photography and incredibly successful. You can brag a little bit on the things that you've done. I love to hear the success stories of women over 50.
Yeah, well, so, I will say that I started this project when I was in my late 40s, and which I'm 58, full disclosure. I like to, say my name and my number proudly. And, I was looking for positive role models of aging as I was approaching 50, which I think is a big number, especially for women, that half century mark. And I just wasn't seeing anyone out there in the media or the news or anything that they were highlighting that was telling me about aging positively. All I was seeing was all the things that you could do to avoid aging, like anti-aging creams. And the movies that I was seeing were all films about the very negative side of aging. There just wasn't anything positive. And let's face it, the one thing that we have in common is that we age every day. So we should learn to embrace it rather than fearing it. And in my own family, I had, the amazing role model of my grandmother, who was getting ready to turn 100. And I thought, I know there's other people out there like my grandmother. And I just kind of set on a quest to, as you mentioned, interview 40 people with a collective life experience of 3,000 years. And it took me 4 years, and what an incredible journey that was. So that was what got me started on it, a passion for wanting to learn more about how I could shape the rest of my life in a really positive way and to have those positive role models in my life.
But what got you to that? Like art is your background and storytelling. And, I was like, you didn't wake up in your late 40s and say, oh, I'm going to, there's a path. And I love to inspire younger women that as you see things as you're going along the way, it could become something in your 50s and telling that story.
So I will tell you that I was, my undergraduate degrees in finance, and I actually took a photo class for fun my very last semester in college. And I fell in love with the magic of the darkroom, which not that many people have anymore, but, watching the image emerge from the developer. And I actually said to my photography teacher at the time, I love being in the darkroom. I want to be doing what you're doing. I love the university environment. I want to be a photographer, but I also want to teach photography at a university. And I was lucky enough to have him as an amazing mentor who, instead of thinking, who the heck is this kid? He's a finance major who's like telling me that, he said, I'm going to take you under my wing and I will help you get into graduate school. And I'm still friends with him to this day. And that's what he did. And then I went on to do an MFA in photography and started teaching at the university in 1995, almost 30 years ago. And have just loved it ever since. I mean, I think, so I would tell young people, don't ever settle. I knew in my 20s that going into finance was not going to be something that would ultimately make me happy. It might make me money, but it wasn't going to make me happy. And if you settle in your 20s, God, what does that look like for the rest of your life? I mean, I think, I think setting yourself up for following the threads that are of your curiosity. I have this saying above my desk that says, your decisions should be based on your curiosity over fear. And I think to learn that early on, where you follow that sense of curiosity, you follow your passion rather than thinking of the things that, could the stumbling blocks, think of them as like, instead of obstacles, I think of them as challenges. And I just follow my passion. And I have done that all along, even including doing a movie about older adults, because nobody was doing that at the time. So, I wasn't necessarily doing that for other people. I was doing it for myself and for following my own passion. And I think if you follow your passion, it will never lead you astray.
No, and you are a woman after my own heart, because this podcast came about when a certain somebody said on national television that a certain woman was past her prime at 55 and he was 55. And my husband tells a story, he goes, you could just see her go crazy. And she just like, that's it. I'm launching a podcast because we are amazing. Women over 50 are incredible and nobody's telling our story. Nobody, like you said, and it's getting better. It is getting better, but
absolutely. It's definitely getting better. I'm seeing things like Frankie and Grace and, there's so many things that are out there, hacks. I mean, I love, one of the things that I've really, now my passion is connecting generations, because I think we live in such an age segregated world that I think one of the ways that we are going to change the world is by bringing generations together. And I love seeing a TV show like Hacks that does exactly that. And that, uses the strengths of both generations really to learn from each other and to grow with each other. And so I love that we're seeing more positive aging, more intergenerational connections that are showing up. That just warms my heart, because it definitely wasn't out there about 10 years ago.
No, I know. And I'm seeing more and more. And I hope I'm helping the situation by bringing, these women forward. And okay, let's talk about your grandmother, because your grandmother really was your influence for all of this.
Yes, absolutely. Well, my grandmother was wonderful. I was lucky enough to grow up in a 4-generational household. So actually, my great grandmother was alive until I was 19. She was in her 90s when she passed away. And so I was lucky enough to have that wisdom and that knowledge, and to, that was just something special that I think as a kid, I didn't realize it was special, because, when you live your own life, you're not realizing that not everyone else around you has that. But I really, I grew up in my grandmother's kitchen. I mean, and that's where, for me, the wisdom and the love and the knowledge was passed down, was while we were cooking together. And I was lucky enough that my grandmother came out to visit me from Florida. She lived in Florida and I'm in California. And for the first time when she was 96, and for the next 4 summers, she spent the month of August with me here in California, which if any of you have been to Florida in August, it's a good time to get out of the hot and humid Florida. And she was an amazing cook who never wrote a recipe down. And I'm sure some of you can relate to that. If you're a cook, you just have it in your head and you know how to do things. But I realized at that point, I really wanted to capture her recipes. And I was lucky enough that digital cameras were recording video at that time. And so my first foray really into filmmaking was doing a little web series that I called Cucina Nana. And it was my grandmother cooking in the kitchen, because I didn't just want to have the written recipes. I wanted to hear the sound of her voice and see the gesture of her cooking. And really that was how I started filmmaking, was because it brought together all the things that I love doing. I'm a musician. I love storytelling. I'm visual. And so it brought all those things together into one nice package to create, narrative stories and documentary films. So that my grandmother sent me on a whole different trajectory for the rest of my life, for the second half of my life, which I love.
So how did you find all these people? And I want to get into some of them, because they were just so heartwarming. And there's definitely some themes in the people that you interviewed. But how did you were they all grandma's friends, or
no, actually not at all. No, when I So really, when I started working on the film, I went back to Florida with my grandmother for her 100th birthday. And she was still working out at the gym, which, by the way, she didn't start until she was 80. So it is never too late to start something new, including working out at the gym. And so I thought, oh my God, I got to film her working out because nobody's going to believe that at 80, she's still like lifting her little weights and doing her exercise bike. And I came back from that trip and I put this little 1-minute video clip together of her at the gym. And I thought, I have something here and I want to find other people out there like her. And so I emailed all of my friends, family, and all the alum that I've taught over the years I've been at the university. And I said, so about 1,000 people. And I said, here's a link to this little 1-minute video clip that I put together of my grandmother. And if you have somebody in your life like her, that's as much an inspiration as she is to me, please nominate them for this project. I had no idea I was going to do a film. And I was just inundated by Heartwarming nominations. I mean, it was so lovely because so many people, were thinking about somebody in their lives. And I would venture to say that everybody that listens to this podcast can think of at least one person in their life that's 75 plus who's an amazing role model for them. And so, once I started getting the nominations and I realized there's no way I was going to get to everyone. I have a place on my website where people can share their stories because I didn't want to be exclusive. I wanted to be more inclusive. And so if you know somebody, you can definitely still share their story on the Lives Will Live website.
Oh, that's great. So you started interviewing them. I don't know, let's talk about, there were so many good ones. It was Lucky Louie, who was 92.
I'm sorry. I know you're not supposed to have favorites, but that man just stole my heart. He was so
I think he's
sweet.
My favorite. So sweet. So, and you tell the story. I could tell the story because he was just so lovable, but he was just is amazing. So let's talk a little bit about his whole history.
Well, Lucky Louie was born in Brooklyn and was Italian American and used to make mozzarellas for his parents' deli. Mutzies, as we called them. Mutzies. Yeah. And went on. He gave himself the nickname Lucky Louie because no matter what happened to him in his life, he always figured out a way to say that he was lucky. I mean, it was amazing. The worst thing could have happened to him, but somehow he was able to turn it around. So he was Lucky Louie. And he ended up, got his medical degree through being in the Army. And anyway, he came out to California and he became a pediatrician. So he was a pediatrician here in San Luis Obispo, where I live. I think most people about my age, if they grew up here, he was their pediatrician because there were only 2 pediatricians in town. And then when he retired, in quotes, his daughter had a deli here and he started making mozzarellas for his daughter's deli. And he would get up at 4 a.m, go work out at the gym, come back, make the mozzarellas, which that in and of itself is a workout, and then continue on with his day. And he did that 365 days a year. And he had some really good one-liners. One of my favorite is happiness is a state of mind. You can be happy with what you have or miserable with what you don't have. You decide. And I so think of that. I mean, I think that was his MO in terms of being Lucky Louie. He learned to be happy with what he had rather than thinking about the things that he didn't have. And what a gift to have that as your attitude. It's just amazing. He just was an amazing guy.
And I don't want to mix him up, but I think I have him right. Was he the one with the 9 kids?
Yes. So he had 9 kids, and his other one-liner was, which I thought was always funny, and
my favorite.
Chuckle. Yeah, it was that he had 9 kids because he had an oversexed Italian wife who couldn't keep her hands off of him, and since he didn't get headaches, he could never say no. And that was so. But he just loved his wife, and his wife had died 23 years prior to when I interviewed him, and he still had his wedding ring on. And you could just tell when he talked about her, he went to another place. He just was and he never wanted to remarry. He that was his love of his life. And I'm sorry I never got to meet her because I imagine she was just equally as wonderful.
Yeah, that was just such a great story. And you had a lot of people. So I'm first generation American. Both my parents are German. My grandmother, I wish she had been alive for you to interview her, was a Russian Jew in Berlin. married to my
Wow.
grandfather who is not Jewish. Oh, the stories. And I've watched a lot of what you said, I've written them down, but I should interview my aunt who's now in her late 80s to make sure I don't miss anything, that I did get all of the stories. But you had so many people that were separated from their parents during the war, 15-year-old. It's really important to tell those stories, because I think the generation now doesn't understand. I mean, we lived through that. Our family members that we knew lived that. And I can't imagine, I have a daughter and a son, but I can't imagine that the one at the train station where there was a bombing and the train took off and she was 15 years old left. Like her mother couldn't get off the train. And
I know it. When I hear those stories, and I think one of the reasons that the film really resonates with people is the stories of resilience and the stories that these people tell about going through these really difficult, traumatic times. Like you mentioned, Emmy Cleaves, who I actually interviewed her because she did the hot yoga that I do, and she was in her 80s still doing it and teaching it. And I thought I have to interview somebody who does that. I had no idea of this whole other story of her escaping from Riga, Latvia, and being left. So the story, she escaped from Riga, Latvia, ended up in a concentration camp. They escaped that. Her and her mom escaped that. They end up on a train platform. They're trying to leave. Her mom's on the train. She's handing up bags to her mom. And all of a sudden there's bombings. The train doors shut and the train takes off. And she's left, like you said, at 15 years old on the train platform. And when she told me that story, I realized, oh my goodness, I just have to pivot completely, because I thought her whole story was going to be about the yoga. But actually, and that was secondary to this whole story of her resilience. And, one of the things that she said, which really stands out to me, is never become a victim. There's always hope, and you can always rise out of whatever moment in time you're in. And I think that was what she had to live to make it through that time. She had a German school teacher that took her in for the remainder of the war. And then she ended up, after the war, coming to the US because she was born on the 4th of July. So she said, well, of course I have to come to the US. And
my husband just told me a story this morning. He's working with a woman. It's taken her 10 years. She's getting her U.S. citizenship, and her birthday is the 4th of July. And she's so excited. She's about to celebrate, her birthday as a U.S. citizen. So
I love it.
Means a lot.
It does. Sometimes we take that for granted. And I think to hear these stories about these people and what they went through and how much it changed their life to be able to come to the United States, I think those stories are very important. Those stories of resilience, of wanting to make it, of, having nothing and rising from having nothing, I think are really very important for people to hear.
And another story that happened in the United States was the Japanese couple with the two young boys, who tell that story, because to think that happened in our country, that we could treat people like that, but that's a story of resilience with her husband and what he ended up doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things when I realized that I was going to actually make a film, because I thought, like I said before, I was going to do this little web series. I thought, okay, I've interviewed all these people and their stories are very Europe centric in terms of the war and escaping Germany or escaping other parts of Europe. And I realized I really wanted to make sure that I also told the story of what happened in our very own country about the Japanese incarceration. And it was 120,000 plus people of Japanese descent, many of whom were American citizens, were placed in camps. And Susie Edelbauman is who I interviewed for that, to kind of tell that story. And she tells a remarkable story. She talked about being interned during World War II, and her husband, who wanted to prove, that they were just as loyal as everyone else, volunteered for the 442nd Regiment, which was one of the most really decorated regiments, and they lost many men, and her husband was one of them, and he gave the ultimate sacrifice. And you just hear that story, and I know when I'm watching the film what the outcome is going to be, that he doesn't make it.
Yeah.
But every time that I hear that, my heart just goes out to her. It's just amazing. On the plus side, she really learned how to get through that. And she talks about having a period of grief and a period of not really wanting to live anymore. And then her, she kind of woke up because she wanted to live for her kids. And I think, that honesty about what it is like to go through an experience of that, I think is also really important for people to hear, because it's, we tend to whitewash a lot of those things, the stories about the Japanese internment, but also the stories about what happens to somebody after they lose someone, and allowing that time of grief and that time to recover, heal, and everyone does it in their own way. But just a positive note, she's still alive. She's 103 and she's still doing amazing.
And she's amazing. But
Yeah.
I thought when she told the story of she was angry with her husband. She's like, why are you going to go fight for this country that's, put us in a camp? But he felt so strongly that he had to prove that they deserve to be Americans and deserve to be part of that. And just, how he passed with that. I don't know, that was just another, I want everyone to watch this because it was so good and so moving. And especially people our age that have grandparents that may still be alive or, have passed and had these, if you really think about, like, I think about, again, being first generation American and my grandparents and my parents, and it's just a different life than, my kids growing up in the United States with their grandparents right here. And I don't want to give them all away, but there's so many great stories, and you want to hear them tell it too. But did you have any other favorites?
Well, I mean, in many ways, they're all my favorites. I like to say that my grandmother, by doing this project, gave me the gift of 40 new grandparents because I just love them all. And I'm still in touch with many of them. And I mean, some of them have obviously passed, but the ones that are still around, I have lunch with. In fact, I'm having dinner with Paul Wolf tonight. And so I stay in touch with them. And I feel incredibly lucky that I have these people in my life. But I think that one of the people whose stories really, or her attitude, I think, really resonated with me was Evie Justison, who talked about reading Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. And if you haven't read it, it's an amazing book. He was a Holocaust survivor. And what she got out of reading the book was that there are many times in our life where we can't control the things that are happening around us. But what we can control is our attitude about how we deal with those things. And I think just like Lucky Louie and his, being lucky all the time and thinking about our attitude and how we can really, that's the one thing we can control. I think that was something that was really lasting. And I think, the other thing I found that I learned really, 3 very important lessons besides, having a positive attitude. I think the other 2 things were, it's super important to have a really good support system. And that doesn't necessarily have to be family. I mean, it was in my family, but it could be family, it could be friends. And I think the other thing is having a sense of purpose. And we need a sense of purpose no matter what age we are. And that sense of purpose can change over time. And especially as people reach a certain age and retire. I like to say I just retired from teaching to do something else. But, we tend to describe who we are by the profession that we have. And I think that's a really difficult moment for people when they no longer have that to define who they are and what they're doing. And I think whether it is making mozzarellas for his daughter's deli or teaching ESL like Rose Albano Ballestero did in the morning, whatever it is, having that sense of purpose is vitally important. And I see that even in, college age students that I deal with, when they're kind of floundering because they don't know maybe what major they want to be or what they want to be doing, they don't have that sense of purpose. So I think that's what I learned is that it's really important to allow for that flexibility as well, for that sense of purpose to change and our reason for being to change and to explore new things. I think that's very important.
Well, there's the one woman who's I think she's 86 and she has 6 credit hours to go to get her PhD. She's like, I'm not going to stop till I get that. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, she started this probably in her late 70s, early 80s. So
absolutely. Yeah, that was Rose.
Yeah. I was like, way to go. That might be me someday. Just keep going. Now you're doing work to connect the generations. So let's talk about that, because I agree with you. I think it's so important to have those relationships and learn the history and not let it die when they pass on.
Yeah, well, I think, one of the things that I was lucky enough is that I still teach part-time at the university, and I have a lot of colleagues there. And I had one colleague who, when the film was in theaters, saw the film and realized that we taught at the same university and reached out to me. And she teaches this class called The Psychology of Aging. And she said, this is just what I've been looking for my class. And so we had lunch together and we talked about how could we connect generations using this film as a catalyst. And so we have done that where older adults and students watch the film and then they ask each other the questions. I had about 20 questions that I formulated. They ask each other those questions to get to know each other. Because I think the hardest thing when you're trying to meet somebody and learn about them and interview them is, what do you ask? You don't want to ask something too open-ended. So having that list of questions as kind of a starter point was really important. And then they do a big wrap party at the end of it. And we've been doing this for about 8 years. We went, when the pandemic hit, we went in online and did it virtually, which was amazing. We work with Senior Planet, which is part of AARP. And so we continue it to this day, which is wonderful. But I also, and a number of universities and high schools have picked up the same thing. PBS Learning Media has it on their website. So educators grades 5 through 12 can use everything for free, and it's got the core standards. We wanted to make it easy for educators to just plug and play and put it into a classroom, because my belief is that, like any other ism, if you know somebody from that other group, it's really hard to have that stereotype or ism about that. And ageism is just like any other stereotype, and it goes in both directions. So it's really important to connect generations. And I so firmly believe in that when it came time for me to write a book, I really wanted to write a book about my experience of making lives well lived and the lessons that I learned along the way. So that's the first half of the book. But the second half of the book, which I titled the book Lives Well Lived Generations, because it's about bringing generations together. The second half of the book is all about bringing generations together. And I interviewed 40 people around the globe who are doing really interesting work connecting generations, whether it's through climate change or voting or an intergenerational symphony or co-generational housing, to inspire other people to either work with those organizations or maybe start their own, and thinking about how we can become a less age segregated society and to really integrate much more than we currently are, because the world is suffering as a result of all this divide that we have. And whatever we can do to bring generations together, I think it will be incredibly healing.
Oh, good for you. Again, I grew up with my grandparents. I was close with them. So I think it's great. And it's the stories. That's what's so important. That's why I said you've inspired me to reach out and get these stories on video.
Absolutely.
I didn't have video to do my grandparents. So to have that for my kids and their kids.
Well, I will say one of the biggest regrets that people had that I interviewed was that they hadn't ask somebody a question who had passed away. So make sure you do those interviews, on the website, which is just lives-well-live.com. If you go to the take action part of our website, the questions that I asked are there. You can use them as a starting point. I also have a video about how to do an interview. So, just to make it as easy as possible. And if all you have is an iPhone or a recorder, I would still encourage you to do it, because it's so important to capture those stories. You will not regret it if you do that. And you'll learn a lot. I mean, people love to talk. And a lot of times what I found was that the people that I interviewed, no one had asked them these questions. And they were so excited to be able to share their stories and their wisdom. So I would encourage everyone to do that.
And that's what's so great about the movies. You're actually hearing their voices and hearing the story. Sky, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. All the information will be in the show notes so people can watch the show, get the book, both of which are excellent. But I wrap everything up. I ask all my guests the same two questions. So what is the greatest thing you've accomplished since you turned 50?
Oh, well, it'd be the Lives Will Live film.
Yeah.
I mean, and all the work that has come from that. That's my life's work at this point. So that would be my biggest accomplishment.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. And it's fantastic. And then anything on the horizon? Where do you see yourself in 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, right now I'm in the process of making two films for PBS. One is called Mochisuki, which is actually based on Susie Edo Bauman from my Lives Will Live film. She invited me to a Mochisuki, which that is the Japanese tradition of making mochi to bring in the new year. And I think it's generations come together to do that. And I love that the wisdom and the knowledge is passed down from one generation to the next. And because I did that with my grandmother. So I love that ceremony, but it's also about the Japanese American experience as told through this mochisuke ceremony, because even during World War II, when they were incarcerated, they still figured out a way to make mochi and to do this mochisuke ceremony to bring in the new year as a symbol of hope for the new year. And the other film that I'm working on is called The Primetime Band. And it's a band, I'm a band geek. I used to play flute, clarinet, and bassoon in high school. And so I love this film. It's this band down in Santa Barbara that is about 75 people strong, mostly made up of people 50 plus all the way to in their 90s, who used to play instruments when they were younger, put them away, and now have taken them back out after they've done maybe their, day job and are playing. And they rehearse every Tuesday night, and then they perform throughout Santa Barbara County. And many of those people are also part of a group called the Music Van, which goes into third grade classrooms, literally with a van full of instruments to introduce music to 8-year-olds, many of whom have never touched an instrument in their lives. So I love this cycle of people coming back to music later in life and paying it forward by introducing it to young kids early in life.
I love that. I have a feeling there's going to be a lot more after these two.
I think so. Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I want everyone to watch that movie. It is so good. I absolutely loved it. I will watch it again. I'm going to have my husband watch it too. It's just, the stories are just amazing. And you're sharing just some great, important lessons for all of us to learn.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening or for watching this episode of Living Ageless and Bold. If you haven't already, please make sure you hit subscribe. And if you like the episode, I hope that you will give us a great review. You can also head over to livingagelessandbold.com and sign up for information, inspiration, and exclusive opportunities for us, women over 55. Thanks for listening. And remember, no matter what you do, keep living ageless and bold.